Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of October. So despite October being a very busy month for like school, like exams, midterms, all those things, I still managed to read 5 books this month and 2 of them were over 500 pages. So I think my way of handling all of the stress of the last month was through reading. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I was looking at all the books I read this month because like I said, it was very kind of a stressful month for me. But yeah, overall these books were really good and I'm really excited to share with you all the ones that I read, and they're kind of all over the place in terms of genre. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out, I first read Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, and I was doing a reread of the original Grisha trilogy because me and my friend are I'm rereading it, she's reading it for the first time for our book club, and so I kind of wanted to get ahead. So last month I read Six of Crows, which I read and didn't really enjoy that much, and I ended up picking up Crooked Kingdom, which I've never read before, and I will say this sequel was amazing. A lot of the problems I had with Six of Crows was that it kind of I felt like the narration was very disjointed because we don't get a lot of plot progression because the author would give you so much background on the character that you'd get like 2 pages of a chapter where actual plot progression is going, and then the remaining like 18 pages are kind of character background. And so this one kind of gets rid of that and we actually focus on the plot. I'm sure you guys already know what this series is about, but it follows 6 misfits that are kind of on an incredible heist, and this is kind of dealing with the aftermath. I don't want to be too specific in what happens because I think it's just kind of best to kind of go into this not knowing too much. But yeah, I definitely like this a lot more than the second one. Like I said, than the first one, sorry. A lot of the issues I did have was with the disjointed plot progression, but this one we don't have that. I felt like I was just hitting the ground running from the beginning and I was just totally sucked in. There's so much like twists and turns in this one, and it does end on a cliffhanger, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a next book in this series. But now I know why everyone raves about this trilogy or series, and like I said, I was actually pleasantly surprised because like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of Six of Crows, but she kind of addresses those problems. We get more character development. I found myself really attached to the main group of characters, and just seeing them trying to pull off this another incredible, impossible heist was just so fun. And like I said, it was a really fun ride. So yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, now I understand what all the hype is about. Like, this was a lot of fun. So next I ended up picking up the Tales and Teacups book club picks for the months of September and October, and it was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I feel like this is a very classic. It basically was the book that started the dark academia trend, which I feel has kind of gained momentum recently. I'm not on Book Talk, but I do see a lot of Book Talk videos on my Pinterest, and this is one that always shows up, and this was actually gifted to me by a subscriber, so I'm happy I was able to read this now. I was waiting until it was kind of like the fall season because I feel like this is the perfect atmosphere, but basically this book follows the main character who ends up becoming part of this kind of teaching group at his university, where he is one of 6 students that is the primary, that works with this one classical professor, and he teaches them about Greek literature, like all the classic stuff. And we kind of get a recount in the beginning. You know that this one character has been murdered, and so for the first half of the book you get kind of the lead up to the events that ultimately led to this character's murder, and then you get to deal with the aftermath. And I really enjoyed this book. You can see it's very clear how this book really much kind of set up the dark academia kind of genre that we've seen that has become quite popular now. And so This one was really a lot of fun, and especially because you are told within like the first few pages who is murdered, you're still trying to piece together like what happened, because you're trying to pick up on little subtle clues that eventually lead up to that build up of his murder, which I think makes it really interesting. I do have some complaints though, like although I did really enjoy the atmosphere of this book and just kind of the general plot, I did feel like the book could have been edited and maybe like 150 pages shorter. I feel like sometimes the plot would be like running in place where it was just like the same things over and over again and nothing was kind of progressing the plot forward. Like there's only so many times when the characters go out drunk, like go out drinking and are drunk and are smoking cigarettes. Like it gets a little repetitive that way, and the characters aren't really likable and they're not supposed to be, so I wasn't really able to really sympathize with their situation, but I still was really invested in kind of seeing like what happens like after the murder, and just how everyone kind of dealt with that was really interesting. So if you kind of like murder mysteries but also like the dark academia feel, I think this is a really good book to kind of start out with, and you can see how this book has, you can see why this book is very popular and very well loved. So yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really, really good. So after reading those big like 500 page books, I wanted to pick up something a little bit shorter, and I ended up picking up The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. And I loved the Queen's Gambit miniseries on Netflix, and so when I saw this at Target for like $8, I picked it up. And I will say, for a adaptation, like the Queen's Gambit like Netflix series is basically identical to this book, minus some things here or there. And there was like, I think this is one, like it's a very faithful adaptation, but I think I prefer the TV show over this book. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I think it was a really fun read, and there are so many details, like specific details in this book that you see in the TV show. So even though I kind of knew what was going to happen, I still really enjoyed reading this. My complaints were that I feel like because it is so short, like it is literally like under 230 pages, I felt like the chapters were very short and you don't get a lot of time getting to be really connected to Beth or any of the other characters because the plot moves on so fast. I feel like the TV show did a really good job of really expanding on these characters, and you get to spend time with them and you get like up close and personal to them too, and I really liked that. I think that was kind of conveyed better in the TV show because it was spread out over 7 or 8 episodes, whereas this one, it was very rushed. I felt like sometimes like the chapters would just go by and like you read 40 pages and she's already aged quite a bit. So I would have preferred if it was a little bit more kind of expanded upon that way. And then there is something with like Jolene, who is Beth's friend, in like the book, when she's kind of at the orphanage, and there's kind of some sexual assault that takes place that isn't really addressed, and the TV show chose to kind of ignore that, which I think was a good choice. And so there was like kind of some things there, like some plot points that were picked up on but never really took off anywhere. So, and I didn't think like that sexual assault like subplot wasn't really handled well, and I didn't think it was really necessary. So yeah, besides those few complaints, I think this is a very good book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but I do prefer the TV show over this one for sure. So next, this is one that is very much outside of my comfort zone, and so I've never really read anything with any like Greek mythology, like Roman mythology, none of the mythologies. So this book really caught my eye, and I actually like kind of like, it was like some parts I loved, some parts I didn't really like, but the synopsis really intrigued me, and it is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve. So basically the premise of this story, it's loosely based off of Norse mythology, but it follows this witch who has this ability to kind of see and tap into the universe and see the future, and so this gift is very much, you know, valued, and so she ends up working for Odin and the Aesir, and she wants to be able to share this gift with others, so she kind of just shares it with like their enemies, and so Odin punishes her and kind of you know, burns her twice, rips out her heart, and so she ends up going on the run, and her heart is delivered by Loki, and they end up falling in love, and she ends up getting these visions on how she sees the world ending, so, or like how she sees the universe ending, and so she has to kind of deal with that, and it kind of goes off from there. I think that's really all you need to know. I will say the first half of this book, it's split into 2 parts. There isn't really any chapters. It's literally just like part 1 and part 2. I will say the first part was very slow, and I felt like it was just like kind of dragging on, and got to the point where it was just like repetitive, boring, nothing really new was adding. Like the plot was very much at a standstill. So I think that first part could have really been edited down, because it was like a solid 175 pages of really not a lot happening until like the last, like, you know, 40 pages of that part. So I think that part could have been edited down a bit, and it was really hard to get engaged and want to read the story, because it's like she's literally just sitting in her cave, not really doing anything, waiting for Loki to come, and it was just not that exciting. But then the second part is where things really start to pick up, and that's when I really got invested. I felt like the stakes were so much higher, and it was just really fun, and I was just really anxious with the characters and just seeing what was going to happen. And I think the last half of the book is where this really shines. So I did give this a 3 out of 5 stars. I think I knocked it down quite a bit because the first, you know, good chunk of the book was so slow and it was a little bit boring. But I think the author really makes up for it, for that fantastic ending, and just how it, like, the build up to ultimately the end was really well done. So, and I just grew so attached to this character's strength and her resilience and just overcoming everything. So yeah, this is the author's like debut novel too, so I think she did a really good job. It was just that first part that really kind of slugged everything down, but I think if she kind of edited out like some of the things and like made it, you know, not as dragged out, I think it would have been more enjoyable. But nevertheless, I still really enjoyed this. It was strange, but I guess that's Norse mythology for you. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this. And lastly, this one will have to be like my most disappointing read of the month, and I really had high hopes for this one too, so I was very much disappointed with how I felt about this one, and it is When the Stars Go Dark by Paula McLain. And this is kind of a standalone thriller. I'm using thriller loosely because it wasn't really a thriller, but basically it follows this girl who is a missing persons like detective, and so she's kind of going through some personal trauma where she ends up going back to her hometown where this girl has gone missing, and it draws a lot of parallels to what she experienced growing up in this town, where her best friend went missing, was later found strangled in the woods. So she ends up getting involved in this case, trying to find what happened to this girl, and like with there, that plot sounded really interesting, and especially with the first chapter, it also like made it seem like this was going to be a really good read, and I was just really disappointed. I feel like the first part in the book, we get like it's alluded to that the main character has gone through this very big traumatic event, and it is not touched on for like the other like 95% of the book until the end. So it's not like, you know, this character's going through something, but it is not addressed until the end, so which was a little bit, I felt like, took away from this character's like development, because yeah, you want to keep the reader interested in why this character is acting it, but when you don't really address it for 95% of the book until the end, like it kind of takes away from that, and which I found annoying. And I didn't really like how the author integrated some like background stories into this. Like you kind of get sidetracked along the way, and although like this main character, a lot of her trauma is very much stemmed in abandonment issues because she was like sent from foster home to foster home, I felt like the author tried to tackle so many different subplots with this character's background that it took away from ultimately the kind of overall narrative of the story. And I felt like there could have been other ways where you could have added to this character's background without taking so much away from the plot progression. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. And I do like, and another thing too is that the author, this takes place in like the early 1990s, and she adds in like a real life like child murder that took place, and has like the main character indirectly connected to that, which I don't think I really like, because it just kind of rehashes the trauma that her like this real person's family had to go through, which I think, I don't know, like you could have mentioned it, but I don't, like, I'm okay with you mentioning an event because it is kind of taking place within the same area around the same time, but I don't know how I feel about her having kind of this fictionalized storyline that is somehow connected to a real life murder, which, especially like a child one, is not how I feel about it. But yeah, so those were my complaints. So I gave this like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I do think the author did a really good job at kind of like making the woods like a character, and how she described our relationship to like, you know, the woods, and how we have to be respectful of, you know, the power that, you know, Mother Nature has over us. I think this book did a good job at tapping into grief and kind of exploring, you know, abandonment issues and grief and loss and all those things. I think that was handled very well, but there was a lot of negative things in here that I just did not like, and I felt like, just with the synopsis, I felt like this had so much potential, but I felt like it fell flat in a lot of different ways, so that was a little bit disappointing. And I did like the ending. Like, I could guess early on who was kind of behind what was happening and how it connected into the past. I think was very obvious, but I still found the ending, even though it was cliched, to be very, you know, fun and exciting just to see how it played out, and I felt like the author did a really good job with that. So yeah, I think like some of you may like this more than I did, but I think just because I'm like used to amazing thrillers like Louise Penny, like all those things, like all those other authors that have done tremendous jobs, I think this one doesn't really hold up as well to these, so that is a little bit disappointing, but yeah, oh well. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you read this month are and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.